By the authority of the University of Nottingham invested in my office, I admit you to the degree of Doctor of Laws honoris causa. Congratulations. Thank you.
I was hugely flattered. I know that sounds something of a bit of a cliche, but it was extraordinary. You just feel you question whether you are worthy of such a great honour, because the University of Nottingham is such an institution of great distinction, and I feel there are far more worthy than myself to receive this. I was not, as I've declared previously, particularly academically gifted, although I had an extraordinary time here at Nottingham, and it truly was life and career shaping for me, because it opened my eyes and ears to so many things.
How was the ceremony today?
The ceremony was fantastic. The university carried it off with great style and with great distinction and aplomb. It was organised brilliantly, and I think it had the right touch of formality, but also wise words of wisdom from the Vice-Chancellor, and the right degree of ceremony as well. And I think it was something where the parents and the mums and dads and the families present of the graduates can feel very much part of. And I think the graduates themselves were splendidly looked after by the university, and were all quite rightly recognised for their distinctions. Well, one of the things that never ever fails to touch me is the glorious setting of the university. It had such a profound impact on me when I first came to interview, which is way back in the early 70s. I came to the university in 1973, but I still remember as a young boy from a Welsh mining village coming up to this glorious setting to be interviewed in the Department of Music. And it never fails to impress me. Yesterday I arrived a day early, and I drove my mother around once more, and she came up when I was here in the 70s. And I drove obviously my wife, who also was my girlfriend when I was here in the 70s, along with my son, who's a student here at the university. We just talked about what a glorious setting it is, and that never fails to impress. And one cannot underestimate that, because being a campus university, it does create an intimacy. It does create the sense of wider family. And the whole structure within Nottingham also manages the transition from home to university so well. And if you're fortunate enough to be able to spend your first year on the campus, it's a great transition, and it really gives you a truly grounded and roots relationship with the institution. So they're one of the big memories. But then, of course, the other memories they just come flooding out when you look at the buildings. You think of the people, and that's the most important thing about any institution. Other people are contained within it, and it was so wonderful for me today, by the way, to see one of my former professors here from the 70s, Professor John Moorhen, who played the organ at my graduation back in 1976, and he played the organ once more today. And we had such a brilliant teaching staff, and I'm sure that the teaching staff today continues that brilliance, because the university has gone from greater and greater to greater and greater things, as it were. But the teaching staff was quite extraordinary, and we had a very intimate relationship with them. We were a very small department. With John Moorhen, there was another brilliant musician called Robert Pascal. Robert has still a relationship with the university, and Robert, again, an extraordinary musician, extraordinary man, a very, very gentle and sensitive and very caring person. And I'm fortunate to have seen Robert recently as well. And the professor at the time was Dennis Arnold, who was a hugely charismatic person. So the university had these characters in the teaching staff who were supremely gifted, and one developed great relationships with. So the whole place was a real sense of family, but at the same time one was trying to not only learn but to grow and to experience, and then to start sharpening the saw, as it were, in terms of one's skills, techniques and abilities. It's pretty strange actually sitting here and discussing this today, because it was 34 years ago I graduated as an undergraduate from the university. It was a blisteringly hot July day in 1976. And the following day I got into a little van with a friend of mine. We drove to London. I had nothing to go to other than the thought that I would become a musician. It was 1976. and I slept on the floor of a pal's house for the summer. Realised I'd have to get a bit of money to back myself, so to speak. So I went back to Wales and I got a job in a factory for the remainder of the summer, which then gave me enough money to get back to London in late September of '76. And then I slowly eked out a living as a musician, which lasted about 4 years, from '76 to 1980 in London. And I developed a network of friends and associates, and I got out and made myself known, and I began to put a portfolio of work together, working in London, in Bristol, in Birmingham, in Glasgow, in Lancaster. And that took the next 4 years working as a musician. But at the end of the 4 years, I realised that perhaps my ambition was not as great as my talent, as it were, and I rethought the career. But at that particular moment, I left the university, as I've said previously, as a slightly angry young man looking for a cause and looking for a job. But I had a bit of a fire burning inside, and it was trying to figure out in which direction that would ignite. And it wasn't until the early 80s where I found myself moving from being a performing musician, recognising that I was not going to achieve what I wanted as a musician, a performing musician, to work into first of all into radio as a producer, and all of a sudden things accelerated. The reason it accelerated was that toward the end of my time as a working musician, I worked in pop music, which was not my thing at all. Even though when I was at the university, I actually conducted a backing orchestra for a visiting rock band called Amazing Blondell in the 70s. Yeah, but I was pretty dismissive of rock music and pop music in the late 70s. And I was so focused on classical music. But I found myself as a musician working with pop music. I worked as a musical director in theatre, and I was asked to write things pastiche of certain musical styles then. I remember Ian Dury and the Blockheads, which there's a movie that's just been released, and Ian's use of words was hugely evocative and powerful, and one of the theatre companies I was working with wanted to use that particular style. So I remember listening to his particular great album then, New Boots and Panties, I think it was called. Yes. Yeah, and asking could I write something like that? Queen were also really one of the big bands then, and could you do that sort of pomp style? So I've been asked to basically copy these things in the theatre. And so when I went into music management, I had a sort of sensibility and sensitivity towards pop music, and all of a sudden I found myself working for a tiny little radio station in the northeast of England, working on the pop music side.
So it's ironic, really.
Yeah. And then things just took off. I became a producer, and I went down to London. I moved back to London because in '76 to '80 I was based in London. From '80 to '82 I based myself in the northeast, and then went back to London in around '84 to become the producer on the breakfast show of Capital Radio, which was a big break basically. And all of a sudden the following year I found myself being headhunted to join BBC Radio 1 as the producer on their then breakfast show. At Capital at the time, interestingly, there was a very new presenter on the radio who was doing the mid-morning slot on Capital called Chris Tarrant. And so Chris was just starting his big radio career then. I left Capital to go to Radio 1, and of course we had it was the biggest radio station, was probably one of the biggest radio stations in the world. Our audience was in excess of 20 million a week. And I worked as a producer, and it worked. I found myself producing lots and lots of different shows on Radio 1, working with a lot of musicians, a lot of pop musicians. And I got on well with the pop musicians because they realised that I was a musician myself. So I did a big series on Eric Clapton, and that took me months and months and months working with Eric and all the musicians he'd worked with. So I hung out very, very privately with like Sir George Harrison, like Sir Phil Collins, Stevie Winwood, the former members of the Yardbirds, John Mayall, people who had influenced Eric. But then I did a big documentary on Madonna over in New York, did one on Wham with George and Andrew, did one on Tina Turner, which was fantastic, spending time with her. What else? Did Bob Geldof, hung out with Bob for a few weekends at his house and did the Bob Geldof story. The list just went on, and it was fantastic.
It must have been great to have access to those musicians.
Yeah, that was the magic of working for not only the BBC, but BBC Radio 1. It was this great calling card to pick up the phone and ring basically anyone in the world of pop music and talk to them. So I had conversations with. I remember standing next to Prince once after his big Wembley concert. I was in Italy when Michael Jackson did one of his big tours. We did things with Queen, with Genesis, with all those big 80s bands, and you had unrivaled access, which not so much took for granted, because that sounds rather arrogant, but you just accepted it was part of the environment you were working in, and you didn't abuse it, and it certainly didn't allow it to go to your head. That was part of the job, as it were. And all of a sudden, in 1987, when I was destined to leave the BBC, because I thought perhaps I've done radio, a bit arrogantly, and I was offered a job as a producer in television, the BBC turned around and said, well, stay and why not become head of the music department of Radio 1, because the present head had reached their retirement age, and lo and behold, I became the head of Radio 1 in 1985. So 9 years after graduating from Nottingham with a music degree, I was head of Radio 1. Yeah. I was really pleased, actually, and I smiled when that I knew I was being part of a ceremony which was recognising the fantastic achievements of young architects and young engineers, because I quite liked that juxtaposition of a music graduate being amongst engineers and architects. And I suppose one of the things I was just gently trying to say was that don't take anything for granted, and think laterally, think creatively with one's life and one's career. That we're not, things aren't linear in life. So a gentle hint at that, which is one message. But the other one is, and I don't know whether it's so relevant today, because it's a tough message, but one of the things I've found is that you do make your own luck. You do have to put yourself in the right place at the right time to give yourself the breaks. And certainly in the world of entertainment, music, media, you have to position yourself, and that's tough. But I gave that message. But also the other message that for every winner there is a loser, and that's what I've learnt in sport, and that's a tough one. And I know it's a bit obvious, but when you have to live it and breathe it as part of your job, which I now do as the group chief executive of Welsh Rugby Union, it's a pretty tough wake-up call. When you prepare everything and everything is done, and all of a sudden you come to the big event and you lose. But what I've learned is, that is the paradox of sport. That is the inevitability, that sport requires uncertainty. Which is a tough one, really, when you think about it, particularly if you're an engineer or an architect, where your whole focus is on creating certainty. You engineer and you design something for certainty. And to work in a culture and environment which thrives upon uncertainty is interesting. So how do you deal with that? And it's then continually thinking this, you replan, you rethink, and you redream that you can and you will. And that was the message that I was wanting to give today. You can and you will. And it's having that strength to, when you do have the setbacks, and the setbacks in one's career as well as in one's life are inevitable, is how you can pick yourself up and move forward, and ideally learn and draw strength for it. And the final thing I mentioned was that you'd never, ever stop learning. I've been very, very lucky in my career where I've had to relearn. When you've gone from to music to pop music, from pop music to records to radio, television to sport, you have got to rethink and relearn. Although there are transferable skills, and you mustn't ignore that either, and that's the creativity and the lateral thinking.